In the military, they teach you that the most dangerous weapon isn't the one in your holster, it's the one your enemy doesn't think you have. At 36, standing in the middle of a high-end Lincoln Park gym, my weapon was 12 years of Ranger-honed patience. And Brandon, with his 24-year-old ego and a TikTok following to maintain, was about to walk right into the ambush. The atmosphere at Iron Harbor Fitness was electric, but not the good kind. It was that heavy, PI storm tension. I was just the husband, the guy in the faded Carhartt jacket who supposedly worked too much and cared too little. Brandon stepped into my personal space, smelling of expensive PI workout and unearned confidence. Walk out before I embarrass you. Old man, he said, loud enough for the girl filming her squats to turn her camera toward us. He didn't just want my wife. He wanted my dignity as a trophy for his followers. He saw a tired 30-something professional. He didn't see the man who spent 3 tours reading shadows in the desert. He thought he was the hunter. God, he was wrong. I didn't give him the satisfaction of a flinch. In the 75th, we have a saying, quiet professionals. If you're screaming, you're losing. I simply turned my back on his posturing, walked over to a withered weight bench, and sat down. My hands were steady as I started unlacing my work boots, slow, deliberate movements that felt like a countdown. Brandon took my silence as a white flag. To a guy like him, if you aren't barking back, you're prey. He turned to the crowd, expanding his chest, playing to the lenses of a dozen iPhones now aimed our way. See this? He laughed, gesturing at me like I was a museum exhibit of a failing marriage. This is what happens when you let yourself go. Sarah told me everything, Richard. She told me how soft you've gotten, how the man she married disappeared years ago under a pile of spreadsheets and excuses. He started pacing, positioning himself so the overhead gym lights caught the definition in his delts, checking his reflection to ensure he looked like the hero of the story. He began detailing our private life, or at least the twisted version Sarah had fed him over post-workout protein shakes. Every word was meant to be a jagged piece of glass, but I just kept my eyes on the leather of my laces. He was performing for a digital audience. I was calibrating for a physical reality. He didn't realize that in a room full of noise, the man who says nothing is the one holding all the cards. 12 years ago, Sarah was my North Star. We met at a black tie fundraiser in Everston, right after I traded my desert tan fatigues for a tailored suit. She was a powerhouse of rising star in corporate law with a sharp wit and a laugh that had this incredible way of decompressing the tension I'd brought back from overseas. We were the it couple. We bought a classic brownstone with a view of the lake, talked about names for kids who hadn't been born yet, and built a life out of shared ambitions and late-night whispers. But lately, the woman I married had been replaced by a stranger. It started small, the new lifestyle shift. Suddenly, our laundry was full of $200 Lululemon sets that looked more like clubwear than gym gear. Then came the extended sessions. She'd come home at 9 p.m, claiming she'd just finished an insane cardio circuit with Brandon. Yet she'd walk through the door smelling like Chanel No. 5 and expensive Chardonnay instead of sweat and rubber mats. I'm a scout by trade. In the Rangers, you don't survive by ignoring the anomalies. You survive by reading the shift in the wind before the first shot is fired. I saw the way she started tilting her phone screen away during dinner. I felt the atmospheric pressure change in our own living room. The woman who once grounded me was now drifting into a different orbit, and Brandon was the gravity pulling her away. She thought she was being subtle, but she forgot she was living with a man trained to spot a tripwire in the dark. In my world, trust is a luxury, but verification is a necessity. 3 weeks ago, I stopped listening to her excuses and started looking at the data. I didn't use high-tech gadgets. I used the basics: patience and a clean line of sight. It was 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. I should have been at my desk in the loop, and she should have been in back-to-back depositions. Instead, I was sitting in a nondescript SUV across from a trendy bistro in Wicker Park. Through the window, the scene was crystal clear. No gym clothes, no dumbbells, no personal training. Just a bottle of chilled Sancerre and a side of Betrayal. I watched Sarah lean in, her face lit with a glow I hadn't seen in 3 years. Then, she reached out and touched his arm, a lingering, intimate gesture that mirrored exactly how she used to look at me back when we were 25 and invincible. It was the tell. Brandon was leaning back, basking in her attention, wearing a smug grin that said he'd already won. He looked around the room with a predator's eyes, checking to see who was watching his conquest. He thought he was the apex in this little urban jungle. What he didn't realize was that 100 yards away, in the shadows of the street, he was being mapped. I wasn't just a jealous husband anymore. I was a man gathering the final pieces of an intelligence folder. Brandon thought he was hunting a trophy. He didn't realize he was the one in the crosshairs of a man who spent his youth tracking targets through the Hindu Kush. The irony of being called distant is that I was actually closer to her family's pain than she was. Sarah had interpreted my long hours and sudden weekend trips to New York as emotional withdrawal. In reality, it was a rescue mission. Her father, Arthur, was fading. Stage 4 lymphoma is a monster that doesn't care about your plans. While Sarah was finding herself at the gym, I was burning the candle at both ends, working double shifts to replenish the capital I was pouring into a specialized clinical trial at Memorial Sloan Kettering. I wasn't in Manhattan for business meetings. I was in sterile hospital corridors, arguing with insurance adjusters and coordinating with the best oncologists in the country to give her father a fighting chance. Every month, $15,000 of our liquid savings vanished into medical bills and experimental treatments. I kept it from her because I wanted her to focus on her career. I wanted to spare her the soul-crushing bureaucracy of terminal illness. I carried the weight so she wouldn't have to. And yet, there she was, handing Brandon $150 an hour of that same money so he could whisper in her ear about how I'd lost my edge. She was paying him to validate her betrayal, while I was bankrupting my sleep and my bank account to keep her father breathing. As I sat on that gym bench, the weight of that secret felt heavier than any rock I'd ever carried. The spark wasn't gone, Brandon. It was being used to keep a man alive. But I wasn't going to explain that to a kid who thought struggle was a high-rep leg day. Brandon's patience finally snapped. To him, my silence wasn't a choice. It was a malfunction. He needed a reaction to feed the cameras, to prove he was the alpha he claimed to be in his captions. Do something or get out, he spat, his face reddening. You're an embarrassment. Then he lunged. It was a wild, desperate right cross, the kind of punch a guy throws when he's watched too many action movies and spent 0 hours in a ring. It was slow. It was telegraphed. It was an insult to the instructors who taught me hand-to-hand combat at Fort Benning. I didn't even have to think. The muscle memory just took the wheel. I shifted exactly 2 inches to the left, a clinical, economical movement. His fist caught nothing but the stale gym air, and his own momentum became his worst enemy. I didn't even hit him. I just let the physics of his own ego do the work. He went sailing past me, stumbling over his own feet, and crashed headfirst into a rack of cast iron kettlebells. The sound of $400 worth of solid iron clattering across the rubber floor was deafening, a jagged metallic roar that cut through the gym's pop soundtrack. The room went dead silent, followed by a wave of sharp, collective gasps. Brandon was on the floor, tangled in the weights he used to sculpt his physique, looking less like a predator and more like a kid who just tripped on his own shoelaces. Embarrassment is a powerful fuel, but a terrible navigator. Brandon scrambled up, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He couldn't handle the shift in the room the way the snickering was now directed at him. He decided to double down on the cinematic bravado, crouching low and charging for a double leg takedown. It was a classic football move, high on aggression and 0 on technique. I didn't move until he was inches away. At the last microsecond, I stepped aside like a matador. I didn't punch him. I simply placed a hand on the back of his neck and guided his explosive momentum into the padded arm of a concept to rowing machine. Thud. The sound was heavy, dull, and final. He slumped against the machine, then slid to the floor. When he looked up, a thin trail of blood was trickling from his split lip, staining his perfectly white teeth. You could actually see his alpha persona evaporating, flickering like a dying light bulb in front of 40 people who were still recording every second of his disintegration. I didn't tower over him. I leaned down, my voice low and conversational, keeping it strictly between us while the phones caught the visual of his defeat. You're telegraphing, kid, I whispered. You drop your shoulder every time you think you're about to be a hero. It's a rookie mistake. If you drop it one more time, I'm going to stop being gentle. And trust me, you haven't seen what not gentle looks like yet. I stood there, calm amidst the chaos of heavy breathing and rolling iron. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed Sarah's number. I didn't just call her. I hit the speaker button, turning the volume to the max. The gym was so quiet now, you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. She picked up on the second ring. Hey, Rich. Her voice came through smooth, professional, and dripping with the casual lie she'd perfected. Just leaving the office now. It's been a long day. Probably going to be late for dinner. I'm at Iron Harbor, Sarah, I said, my voice steady. I'm standing here with Brandon. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was absolute. It was the sound of a cliff edge. I looked down at Brandon, who was still on his knees, staring at my phone as if it were a live grenade. Actually, I continued, Brandon was just in the middle of a very public seminar. He was explaining his training methods to about 40 people and their followers. He's been very descriptive about your sessions. I could hear her breath hitch a sharp, jagged intake of air over the digital line. I know about the bistro in Wicker Park, I said, each word a hammer blow. I know about the 2 a.m. texts. I know why you smell like Chanel and Sancerre instead of the gym. I've seen the intelligence, Sarah. I've seen the terrain. I leaned in closer to the MIC so the crowd could catch every tremor of the ending. The old man is done playing the part you wrote for him. The game is over. In the military, we call this the end game, when the enemy realizes the ground they're standing on has been mined for weeks. Sarah might have been a corporate lawyer, but she'd made a fatal mistake. She assumed I was playing by the rules of a heartbroken husband. I wasn't. I was playing by the rules of a ranger who'd already secured the perimeter, since you're a fan of the truth now. Sarah, let's talk about the fine print, I said, my voice projecting through the gym like a final judgment. The brownstone in Lincoln Park. It was bought under my family's LLC before we even said I do. It's non-marital property. And those joint accounts you thought were your safety net. I emptied them yesterday. I heard a faint, choked sob on the other end. But I didn't stop. That money isn't gone though. It's been moved into a locked, irrevocable trust dedicated solely to your father's cancer treatments. It's legally untouchable for me, for you, and especially for your friend Brandon here. It's the only good thing left of this marriage. I looked over at the gym manager, who was white-knuckling a clipboard, looking like he wanted to vanish. The divorce papers are on the mahogany table in the foyer, Sarah. Don't bother calling your firm. My guy already filed the no fault with a side of documented adultery evidence for the acid hearing. Then, I turned my gaze back to Brandon, who was trying to wipe the blood from his lip with a trembling hand. And Brandon, you might want to check paragraph 12 of your employment contract. The morality and professional conduct clause. Iron Harbor doesn't take kindly to trainers who use the equipment to sleep with the clients. Especially when the whole training session is currently trending on TikTok. The manager was already halfway to us. His face a mask of liability terror. He wasn't coming to help Brandon up. He was coming to hand him his walking papers. 6 months later, the humidity of Chicago is a distant memory. I traded the skyscrapers for the Flatirons, moving into a quiet cabin on the outskirts of Boulder, Colorado. Sometimes the ghosts of the past try to catch up, but out here, the air is too thin for them to breathe. The fallout in the city was total. I heard Iron Harbor shuttered its doors for good after that video went viral. In the age of the calculated image, a clip of a star trainer getting dismantled by a soft husband is a death sentence for business. Brandon's brand didn't just break, it incinerated. Last I heard, he's working the register at a GNC in a suburban mall, selling PRE workout to teenagers who don't know his name. No cameras, no followers, no glory. Just the fluorescent lights and the weight of his own choices. Sarah? She's stuck in a cramped studio apartment in the suburbs. Her high-flying legal career dampened by the messy public reality of the divorce. She's fighting a losing battle in court. But since I'm still the one signing the checks for her father's care, she hasn't dared to challenge the trust. Arthur is in remission now. That's the only victory that actually matters to me. As for me, my life doesn't involve spreadsheets or surveillance anymore. I'm out on the trails at 5 a.m. every morning, watching the sun bleed over the Rockies. At 36, I'm leaner, faster, and more focused than I ever was in my 20s. I spent a decade drowning in the noise of someone else's lies, trying to fix a life that was already broken. But out here, in the crisp, high-altitude dawn, the silence isn't screaming anymore. For the first time in a decade, the silence is finally peaceful. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. What do you think about this story? Let me know in the comments.